Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Crafting with Zizaran. Today's episode is going to be all about the crafting bench, and we have a lot of examples lined up as well for the end of the episode to show you guys how to use it, and we're going to tell you how to get it. So that is all of today's episode. So you obtain the crafting bench by going to once you're in Act 2, and you free Helena from the Chamber of Sins. Once you've freed her and you've killed Fidelitas, then she will give you another quest, which she will tell you to go to the Dread Thicket, which is a side area in the Northern Forest, and you have to go into, it's like a marker on the screen we'll show in the background, and you go inside there, you clear the entire area, it'll say hideout unlocked, I think instantly, but then you have to go back to her inside the Dread Thicket side area, talk to her and say something like teleport to hideout or claim hideout. And then now you've got your first hideout. And in your hideout, you will now have unlocked the crafting bench. Now, when you first start out playing, there's not going to be a lot of recipes, and you can unlock recipes as you progress the game, and we'll talk about that in the next session. But I want to talk a little bit first about what the crafting bench does. So there's a lot of different stats that you can add on to your items, and a lot of them are surprisingly powerful, but normally, you can roll better ones yourself by crafting a really good item, but there's sometimes when an item will have like 2 or 3 really good stats, and having the ability to add a 4th one, even though it's like less powerful than something you could naturally roll, you can make a really good item by crafting, and that's what the examples in the 3rd section is going to be all about. Now, you can't roll duplicates. So if something has, for example, spell damage, you can't roll another spell damage mod on top of that, with some exceptions. In Path of Exile, we have something called hybrid mods, and I have an example real quick here of that. So if I hold down Alt with the advanced tooltip thing showing, like we explained in episode 2, then you can see here that this is conjurers, and this is spell damage and mana, and this does actually stack with spell damage. So there are a few hybrid mods that will allow you to have it twice. But like with this pure damage roll, it'll tell you this item already has a mod of this type. Now that you have your hideout as well, you can invite later on Zana once you finish Act 10. You can invite Navali, which you unlock in the climb in Act 1. And you can unlock Nico once you're in Act 4. So you can have these in your hideout, and you can turn in divination cards to Navali. Now, if you're wondering how do you unlock the different crafts, it'll actually tell you at the bottom. It'll actually tell you at the bottom of the crafting bench how you unlock them. So there will be some that are unlocked just by progressing through the storyline, and you'll see crafting pedestals like this around the world. And let's see if I have any examples here that I don't have. Like here, you have to go to the Temple of Azorul and make a little 3 hybridization chamber. As far as I know, they are working on removing that, but I don't think that's reworked for Legion. So there will be some available in the Azorul Temple. And then a lot will be, for example, physical damage is available through going to the sewers in Act 3. And there's like a lot of different areas where you always go to get the upgrades. And if you're ever wondering where they are, you can scroll down and hover over what you're looking for. So if I was missing spell damage, I could search spell damage, scroll down, and see where it is. Now, once you get to Act 9 and beyond, you start getting a mechanic called Betrayal. This is a very dangerous mechanic. They will start dropping veiled items. And once you find these veiled items, you can unveil them through Jun. And she gives you the option of one where you can unlock something. So for example, spell damage and chaos damage. And these you can also see how you unlock here. So here, Onslaught during soul game prevention, you unveil by boots or gloves, and it'll tell you as well. A lot of the unveiling ones can take quite a lot of time to get, and they're very strong, sometimes very costly. A lot of players will sell or help you craft these as well. Like additional curse can be fairly rare, and a lot of other players will say like, hey, I have additional curse, I'll craft it for you. Be aware that unless this is someone you trust, they can just take your item. And that does happen. So be careful for that. If it's something you can't afford to lose and you don't trust the person, don't do it. There's no great crafting service in the game at the moment. One of the greatest advantages to finding and unlocking your own recipes is that you don't have to worry about trusting a stranger with your expensive endgame crafts as well. And you can also help others or help your friends with them. Right, so we're moving on to section 3, and we have some examples of gear that is already pretty great, or at least useful, but will be made really good with a small craft. So if you hold down Alt on this item, you can see that this has a prefix fist damage and a prefix flat fist damage, which already makes it a fairly useful item. However, it's got an open suffix, but here I can scroll down and do attack speed, and for even just 6 alterations, I can massively improve the damage on this weapon. Here is a weapon that has attack speed and physical damage, but it's also got an open prefix, so I can unlock a physical damage recipe and then, you know, put on either 40 to 59, 60 to 79, depending on how many alterations I have to spare. So as long as you hit 1 or 2 good stats, it's very, very easy through the crafting bench and the recipes you unlock to make the items really good. Here's an example of a chest that's missing life. It's got two resistances and strength on it, and the strength is basically 20 life. So if I really needed life for my character and felt like I was dying, I could add life for, you know, depending on how much I want to invest. But early game, that could like definitely help you. Same with here, you have a life with high life. This is probably a better one because this is really cheap. Then I can add resist to this for either a transmute or an alchemy. I wouldn't use the chaos one. That's too expensive. Here are some really good examples of early game ones. So this is ones that I bought from the vendor in Act 3. And I just threw an essence on them. And I didn't hit anything else than what the essence did. So this is hit the essence frozen, which is the flat added to spells. And then I can craft spell damage. So I look up the spell damage mod and I'm like, oh, nice. I can get 25 to 34 spell damage for 4 alterations. Or later on, I can do for 8 alts. And it says here what the level requirement of the weapon will be later. So this is already requires level 33. If I craft this, it will still be 33. However, if I crafted this one, the 48, it would now be required level 48. So be careful with that if it's your second character possibly, and you're crafting recipes that you unlocked at a higher level. Here's one with percentage spell damage, and then we can craft, for example, cold damage to spells. Generally, like if you're using a cold spell, it can be pretty useful to craft more cold damage because you're usually already scaling that with your spell. This is pretty cheap as well, either 4 transmutes or 2 alchemies for like the cheap ones. Pretty good weapon already there. Here was the example of how you can still craft double spell damage on some items. There's a similar one for physical where there's a hybrid fist damage where you can still craft fist as well. These all come with 2 stats. So you can see the spell damage here, it's spell damage and mana, and the similar one for fist is fist damage and accuracy in the same roll like you see here as well. So that crafts, and then you have a total of 46 spell damage, and you can get 50 something. Now, another really useful feature of the crafting bench is its ability to put on completely useless stats. It sounds counterintuitive, but I'll explain. So this is more of an advanced feature, or part of why I'm saying this is an advanced feature, which we'll go over later. But as an example, I have the ability to put spell damage on this siege axe, which is not something you can naturally roll. And the main reason I want to warn about this early is this. If I'm searching, say I want to put on cold damage, right? This particularly, the 35 to 41, 63 to 73 cold damage, this is specifically while using the weapon. So if this was on a melee weapon, it's with hitting it. And this would not apply to spells, which can be very confusing because it doesn't say what it doesn't specifically say to attacks. But this is specifically to attacks. So you got to make sure that it says spells. There are, I think this is something I might have to do a full video on, but at least things that are on rings and amulets are generally global. For example, if this wording was on a ring, that would mean it's global, which is really confusing I wish it was a little bit more specific, so this maybe said 2 attacks. Because you can have, I don't know if I can show an example here. Yeah, this is global. And this is local. Not my fault. Don't sue me. Now, if you accidentally craft this, it's not a costly mistake, right? Especially if you realize it. You craft like the 2 cold damage, and then either a friend of yours or you realize it or you point it out, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'll just recraft it. So you see, it adds that, okay, it already has the craft on it. It'll recraft while using an additional scour and recraft. And this is like really nice for, say on a late game item, you want like the highest roll. And you're like, okay, only 36, 37, 43, 43. Like maybe you really want 44, right? So you can keep easily doing this without having to do scour, craft, scour, craft. So that's a useful feature. We got some nice examples of boots for you here. So obviously, as I talked about in the previous episodes, movement speed, really, really important. So there are different movement speed recipes. This one's actually really good and definitely worth investing in if you find, let's say, boots with like 70 life and 70 or 80 resistances. That if it doesn't have movement speed, but you can craft it, it's definitely worth crafting the 4C one. And then obviously you have the cheaper ones as well. So early game, you actually unlock this in the caverns, at the end of the caverns before you go towards Val. So you can get that very early, and a lot of players end up doing that. It's very cheap. Another example is if you find really high movement speed boots with like say resistances like life and movement speed, and you get good ones, then you can craft pretty decent cheap life as well. So there's a lot of workaround room here that you can work with. On rings, normally I don't end up crafting many things that require alterations early on, but it depends how much rares I've bothered to pick up in vendor. If you look here, some examples of rings, and normally I would put more resists on these, especially after you kill Kitava and I5 and you lose a lot of resist. You can end up with your character being something like something like this, like 37 cold, 23 lightning, and then it can be really nice to either, if you have a lot of alchemies, that's great, or at least transmutes you should have a lot of just by picking them up through the storyline. Make sure you have an item filter as well. If you don't already, I would recommend Never Sinks. Very nice. And then here are 2 already pretty good rings. Same with the amulet. Definitely something you want to get resist on. There's not much damage craft for rings and amulets early on. Normally they're things that you have to unveil, like at least a lot of the useful ones. So there's not much you can do for damage on your first go around on a league start. Hope you guys are enjoying the crafting videos that we're making. Remember that the videos are also like we're translating them into Brazilian Portuguese, Korean, and Russian, and potentially more in the future as well. Let me know if you have any feedback, and I hope to help. If you have any questions, drop by my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Zizaran. Thanks for watching, and try to die less than I do.